What is it? Okay.
Yes, that works. Well, welcome everybody. For our session right now, which is how Smart TV takes more responsibility for content distribution. And let me just lead off by giving a bit of an overview. I think, over the past few years, we've seen the Smart TV rapidly rise in importance within the consumer household. And especially when we look at some of the factors that have contributed, which have been rising consumer affordability, smart functionality becoming table stakes in the smart TV market, and heavy growth in consumer streaming video consumption. And today, arguably, the smart TV has become the dominant centerpiece of entertainment consumption in the household, and arguably now the most important point of content distribution for at-home consumption. But has the collective media and entertainment technology industry truly made the most of this opportunity? So in our discussion today, we're going to explore how the industry can further maximize this important role that the smart TV plays in content distribution today. And to this end, we've assembled a terrific and varied mix of perspectives on the smart TV industry in the form of the three esteemed panelists that we have with us today: Carson from Google TV, Sally Nelson from Roku, and Dirk Wittenborg from Season and Mission One. So welcome everyone. Let's introduce ourselves to the audience. Ben, do you want to start and tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Google?
Hi all, I'm Carson. I work in Google's Media and Entertainment Partnerships team. I help broadcasters and streamers, particularly in the UK, Ireland, the Nordics, reach their audiences on mobile devices and on TV. And that intersection of all of the surfaces that users engage with their content on is critical to the way that we help broadcasters and streamers build their audiences, retain their audiences, and monetize that time spent.
Thanks, Ben. Sally, how about you?
Sure. My name's Sally Nelson. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. Hope I make none of you sick. Great. So I lead international product at Roku. So there's been a lot of talk already, obviously, about Roku, but just to recap a little for those who either haven't been here or aren't as familiar with Roku. So Roku basically pioneered streaming to TVs back in 2008 with our first streaming player. Since then, we've moved more into the smart TV space, and particularly in certain markets. For example, last year we were the #1 selling CTVWS in the US for the 5th year running. We were also at the end of last year the #1 in Mexico and Canada. We have sort of 80 million active accounts globally, and last year they streamed, I think it was over 100 billion hours in 2023. So my role is basically looking at how we take those phenomenal products that are doing so well in the Americas, bring those to international markets, and make sure that we are really tailoring them for the needs of local markets.
Thank you, Sally. Dirk, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do at Season and Mission One.
Well, I'm pretty long in this industry. I think we started 2007 already, where there was not really a kind of smart TV out yet. I founded together with a partner, Relax TV, which you heard before in the content, and Foxhome, which was merged last year with Season. That's also the connection. Foxhome had an OS and a fast streaming services. Season had the same. We merged the two companies to build a bigger platform. So we already were one of the first consolidators in the market, which Andy was telling us before that this is going to happen. What I do now, mainly focusing on what Mehmet presented in Mission One. So I will run with Mehmet. I run the consolidation across all the independent TV brands to represent their interests to get a fair share from the cake.
Excellent. Thank you, Dirk. And as for myself, I'm Paul Erickson. I'm founder and principal of Erickson Strategy and Insights, which is a strategy and analysis consultancy serving the media and entertainment technology sector and the consumer electronics sector. So I'm a 20-plus year veteran of industry analysis and consultancy within this industry across different analyst firms such as Omdia, Parks Associates, MPD, and IHS Markit, now S&P Global Market Intelligence. So in the past 5 years, I've spent particular focus looking at the streaming industry and particularly smart TV platforms. So this is a very relevant panel for me today. So without further ado, let's dive into our first question. And I want to have a little bit of a level set from each of our perspectives on the topic. And so for each of you, from your perspective, what are the most pressing problems to solve or the most promising opportunities to capture when it comes to the growing importance of the smart TV and content distribution today? Ben, did you want to take the first shot at this?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking about this question beforehand, and the word that kept coming up for me was sustainability across the entire ecosystem. So everything from sustainable engagement with audiences. We see a lot of audiences still consuming a lot of broadcaster apps in a catch-up type model, and those broadcasters trying to become more like streamers with audiences coming back on a regular basis. That sustainable engagement with audiences is something that the TV platforms, all of us here, I think are really focused on, making sure that we can drive those audiences into partner applications for that sustainable engagement. And then you look at that engagement and you say, how do you best monetize this on this platform? So we work a lot with our broadcasters on how they optimize their advertising, how they optimize conversion for subscription funnels. It's really interesting if you look at the likes of ITVX in the UK, really focus on how they, in the long term, balance out their real dominance and scale in the TV ad world with the ability for users to sign up to their more premium services. And as a platform, we're focused on how do we help create that funnel for audiences? How do we expose them first to the free content and then exposing them through to paid content to help our partners, whether they be streamers or broadcasters, move audiences is through that. And then there are really key platform functions. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but key platform functions that help users keep coming back and keep finding value. Really basic things that in a lot of places we take as granted. Continue watching rails are one of the best recommendation systems that we have. You watched episodes 1 to 9 of this series and episode 10 has just come out, is the best recommendation you can give somebody. So making sure that we expose that well for audiences and provide those tools for our broadcast partners is really key to what we're focused on.
Thank you, Ben. Sally, what about you? From the Roku perspectives, biggest problems to solve or biggest opportunities to capture?
Yeah, certainly. Excuse me, sorry. Biggest opportunities, I guess, look, we all know, obviously, as I think we've seen from some of the earlier slides, the migration of the audiences are certainly coming and starting to use smart TVs more and more. We're starting to see them sort of spending more and more of their time in those ecosystems. We're seeing certainly a lot of the ad dollars now in TV starting to shift over towards streaming as well, which is great. All opportunities to work towards. I think the main one for me, and sort of the area that we spend a lot of time on, is there is obviously also a growth in content availability through streaming. There is now a massive plethora of content out there that is available over IP that's diversified across sort of a huge range of apps. But I think that comes at a really nice time because at the same time, the industry's been developing all of these tools, so we can really take that huge amount of content and we can help sort of bring those consumers to that content and help them find the stuff that is really relevant to them and kind of wade through the amount that is out there at the moment.
Thank you, Sally. Dirk, what about from your perspective, any of the problems in the industry that stand out or opportunities that stand out for you?
Well, I think they're like, it's a matter of perspective, what you take. I think there's a consumer perspective and there's a business perspective. When I go to the consumer perspective, for me, one of the biggest challenge we have to overcome is content discovery. Because when you look at like what happened in connected TV, we fragmented content from a consolidated value proposition initially from a traditional TV, so it was very consolidated, a few relevant channels. Now when you look at how we have designed smart TV user interfaces, very much application-centric. So the content exploded, there's much more to see, and we present applications. In many, many TVs you still see like an UI design. So I think it's one of the biggest challenges how to let the consumer discover the content without the noise of being misled by our traditional recommendation. What I mean by this, when you look at like go an app like Amazon Prime, I have a TV in Spain. Now Amazon Prime starts to recommend to me in Spanish. And then I even understand it and I click and I realize they followed what I watched before and they designed the recommendation to make me click. So like what we know from social media, motivate people to click but not to stay. So I think this is one of the biggest challenge we have to overcome. I think AI will help us a lot because the way we navigate and recommend is very linear, very limited. Our brain has, like I always say, the brain is 100% what we can have as data. Then language is probably 90 to 95, and then we go to the remote control, that's 1. So we limit ourselves with learning from the consumer, and then we beef it up, making Siri or Alexa, which is 25. but still not where we are. And when you allow the TV to understand my casual language, it will be a fundamental difference, because I limit the necessary information and I limit the necessary content to present. And when you look at fast, I mean, we talk about more than 10,000 fast channels now. Who on earth want to digest this? Right? So it's crazy, and every day we have 200 more. So this is the consumer side. I think this is the biggest challenge to overcome, because otherwise we will not see the engagement. Because when we look where ad spending goes, it still goes in linear TV. And we still are mainly programmatic in connected TV. Roku is a good example. They have made it much better than others because they were early starters. From the business point of view, we have a huge problem of fragmentation, data fragmentation and inventory fragmentation. So if you're a marketer, how you want to address a household? You get inventory from Netflix, you get inventory from Samsung. Maybe someone has with Netflix an inventory split deal, so the same inventory within the Netflix app will present it through 2 channels, and then Samsung has the own fast and doesn't share the data. They keep the data for themselves, while Netflix has only the data from Netflix. And this is presented to the marketeer, completely confused. So we are far away from really realizing the monetization potential we could have.
Yeah, and I think
these are my two big challenges.
And I fully agree with one of the things you mentioned, which is the challenge of discovery. You know, is only increasing on smart TVs as we see more and more content availability. But you know that box through which you're consuming remains the bottleneck, right? So how does the consumer find their way to the content that's relevant to them, and how do you, from the technology side, make sure that you are delivering that to them, right? And you're surfacing that recommendation, you're bringing that thumbnail up, and that challenge only increases as we exponentially ramp up the content that's available across, you know, live, on demand, fast, and what have you. And I think often when I see articles talking about you know, the glut of fast channels, I think that it's not in and of itself a problem. I mean, I think content availability across a wide variety of genres and types and languages is phenomenal for the consumer, provided that they can access it. You can have 50,000 channels, but the consumer should never see that there's 50,000 channels. They should just see that, wow, there's an incredibly relevant, tailored set of content that they have presented to them every day. So I think that that's easy to say, hard to do. But it is something that remains a fundamental challenge for the consumption experience and the distribution experience as well. Now here's a question that I think all of you will want to speak on, and part of it deals with something that Terry brought up earlier, which is the immense number of smart TV OSs that are out there today. Some people don't realize that it's 16, I think Terry said. You know, so there's far beyond just the typical handful that we know of. And you know, as we look at that choice overload for TV set OEMs, right? There's so many choices out there. How do they determine the best fit for their purposes? You know, and so what are the considerations that they should really look at when they're looking for an OS or experience partner? And you know, is it the features? Is it the hardware sales and margins that they see today? Is it the recurring revenues or the advertising rev share that they get, or the brand sovereignty from the platform, or what exactly? How should they look at making that choice? Sally, what are your thoughts on this from the Roku perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I think, look, fundamentally you have to get some of the basics right, for sure. So I think a lot of TV OEMs are still very focused on quality and value, right? It is a sort of a low margin business, so creating value is still absolutely key. Quality is an interesting one, because I think traditionally quality's all been very much about, you know, picture quality and audio quality, and maybe there was HD and how many pixels, and then up to 4K, and it's all been very focused on that. I think increasingly we're starting to see more and more OEMs who are concerned about the OS and are interested in a number of aspects of that. So one is, you know, does it work? Is it fast? Is it performant? Is it snappy? What does it do? How easy is it to use? Can it get people to the content that they want? What features does it have? And they're starting to look certainly more at that. And I think they're the foundations. They're making sure that you basically are allowing TV manufacturers easily to create TVs that they can offer at kind of competitive price points that consumers will love. It's pretty basic, but it's certainly what we've built our success on. I think as the relationships are evolving, and I think we've touched on it a little bit earlier today, we've started to see more relationships where we're sort of with OEMs and even potentially retailers as well, looking at slightly different commercial models. So for example, I think we've announced some partnerships we've got in the US with the likes of Best Buy and Walmart, where we're bringing together kind of the TV platform alongside sort of, and our ad capabilities on that platform alongside what those retailers are looking to do, for example, in the media business. So yeah, it's really bringing those together and seeing how you can, yes, provide the foundation, but how you can then add incremental value to kind of everybody in that chain.
Thank you, Sally. Dirk, I know Season and Mission One have a bit of a different take on the market or a different perspective. So what are your thoughts on how TV set OEMs or how brands should look at their choice of OS?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily different. I agree with many things of what Sally was saying before. And Roku is a good example how to make these basics right, because I think this is a good reference model. When understanding this, what makes the success of an OS to be selected, I think it's also important to understand the market dynamic, where we're coming from. Because when you look at the market, we came from traditional TV, moved into connected TV. There was a natural growth of transition of the hardware type. So this is happening since long, and now we have the next wave of viewing time is moving. It's going from linear to streaming only. So there's still a natural growth for the monetization of an operating system. But when you look at the underlying market, the overall number of TVs being sold is flat. There's no growth since many years. So that means when the hardware transition is completed, we are going in a competitive, squeezing out my competitors as an OS. Everyone has to face the same challenge. And then the question is for TV brand, what are my partners most likely going to do? If they want to grow, they want to squeeze out others. They have multiple options. They license the OS, or they sell Samsung sells the TV cheaper. So would I really like to take an OS from Samsung when I think Samsung will beat me on price next month in the market? Unlikely, because Samsung has much more flexibility to underprice my TV. So that's, I think, a very, what was mentioned before, a huge threat. And this is basically what we say, trust in non-compete. And we have seen, Amazon is another good example in the US when they started to make their own TV. So suddenly, everyone has to discount the price who was an Amazon Fire. Week by week, the prices had to drop, and no one could be ahead of Amazon anymore. So they used the OS from Amazon. Amazon was beating up the partner by making their own TV. So I think the trust base is very important. And then at the end, when you look for the consumer, I think I discovered this before, this kind of user experience. And then at the end is what we discussed earlier, the TV margin will go down. We are at the moment at $165 for 55K TV FOB China. So you get it in the market for $200. So that means how much margin you make if a 10% margin? Very little. So the TV brands have to think about when is the first one giving out the TV for free? And who will this be? Most likely Amazon. So how do I protect myself for the moment? It's about building an installed base that allows me to have a long tail revenue. So I think this kind of sharing monetization, not on a one-off upfront, but let them partner in the success of the OM or of the OS is one of the key features the TV brands will take to select the OS vendor.
Good point, Dirk. Ben, Google TV has had a lot of momentum as of, well, maybe not as of late. It's been building steadily over the past few years. Can you speak to how some of the TV set OEMs are choosing from the Google perspective, and maybe some insight into why more of them are gravitating towards Google TV these days than previously?
Yeah, I would agree with all of the points made. The basic commercials of the deal have to work out for any OEM, and that varies from OEM to OEM, and from the talks we were having earlier, from market to market. In some markets, the OSs are better integrated with local providers, the commercials just work in certain markets, so there's that element. But just a quick show of hands, when you last bought your mobile phone, who picked their phone based on the operating system that it ran? Now keep your hands up if you did that for your TV. A much smaller number, and probably the total number of people who ever did that are sat in this room. But increasingly, we are seeing that become one of the factors that audiences choose. Now, the life cycle of TVs that we've just discussed is much longer, so you see this play out over a much longer period of time than you do in the mobile space. But as users find more value in the operating system they're using, in the recommendations it's providing, in the integration with maybe their smart home, the integration with their mobile device, we are starting to see an uptick in consumers picking their television based on the operating system, especially when everything else is, in their eyes, equal between the TVs. The picture quality, the size, the price. The operating system can be that thing that tips the user over. So we are starting to see that in some of the data. And we expect that only to grow in time. So that's, I think, another factor that TV OEMs are going to be taking into account over the coming years. And that integration with things like smart homes, we all have for many years been hearing about Matter and its expansion. We announced that Matter will be coming in Android TV operating system 14. And again, that's another feature that OEMs are able to take to market, and maybe they're selling other smart home connected devices in the same store, and it starts to create a larger package for that OEM. So that broader sort of context we increasingly think is important. And then lastly, we saw before there are a lot of OEMs picking multiple OSs to have in market. And we expect that to continue because, exactly to your point, no one wants a world in which they're stuck with one provider long term. It's good to have competition in the market. It's good for users to be able to pick, for OEMs to be able to pick, and that to be a dynamic and therefore innovative market, which is, I think, what we've seen over the last decade. Had been a massive amount of innovation based on that choice and the OEM's choice to move and flex between the different OS providers.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see as the smart TV landscape excuse me, continues to get more competitive in the coming years, how different platform providers will differentiate in the added value that they're delivering to their partners and in the ways in which they innovate in terms of their revenue sharing, or making sure that, one, they're delivering high value, they're delivering added value over the life cycle, and on top of that, they're making sure to not compete. So I think those will all be important. And I had touched on this previously a few minutes ago, but it's something that I think that we all should dive into, which is that with smart TVs becoming the principal aggregation point for content consumption in the home, getting viewers to the right content within this massive sea of options has become more important than ever. And so what are the ways that the industry can looking at what's possible today and improving upon that, what are the areas in which the industry can improve upon the overall discovery experience, particularly when it comes to optimizing it for today's challenge, the massive number of fast channels and content? Dirk, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my first pick would be get rid of the remote control. I know Google will hate me for the comment because your remote control is one of the best and one of the most successful because of simplicity. But as a consumer, if I would not need to struggle with a remote control or the limitation of a remote control, it gives me just a linear protocol to what to do. That would be my first pick to make life easier. And then using artificial intelligence to allow the viewer to communicate with the TV and express what you want. Because you don't start in thinking in metadata when you search something. You don't think in genre. Yes, you think in genre, but you are much more precise when you think in action. Right? You have already excluded a few movies which is older than like 3 years, and you have already something clearly in mind. If we would allow the TV to get my mind through voice as quickly and as transparent, as clear, this would allow fundamentally to change how we recommend and how we present content. And I think the next big thing is what we are going to see is we're still app-centric, and when I look there are two competitors, the content side and the OS, trying to control the gateway. I call it the super app strategy, which Apple is doing, Prime and YouTube. They try to build the super app. They try to replace the OS as the entry point. And the OS will move away from app-centric on the landing page to create a single gateway to present content. But this only works if your recommendation is precise. Because otherwise, the viewer will be annoyed that you present the wrong gateway. And then he's annoyed because you present the whole time something he doesn't want to see. And I think if we solve this, and I think this will come soon because we have the first trials of artificial intelligence voice, large language models, two people can speak at the same time to the TV, which happens at my home every day. constantly. My wife and I, we all have different opinions, right? And the TV, which we're testing, can handle it.
Yeah.
At the end, it's asking, okay, whom should I follow? And then we have to decide. And this is already working. It's not mass market ready yet, but in the labs it already works. And that's the big thing I see is changing.
That's very encouraging. Sally, what are your thoughts on improving discovery, especially when it comes to the challenge of managing this massive number of fast channels?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, you don't have to use the remote. You can use
Yeah.
the remote. That's fine. That's fine. We won't mind. But no, look, I think the main thing for me, so we've always been focused on making sure that the experience is simple and intuitive and easy to use. And I think we still stick to that. That is still our priority goal when it comes to designing the experience. But I think everything that Dirk said is right. I mean, in reality, what that is transitioning to at Roku is less of a simple app-centric view necessarily, and more around, yes, providing recommendations, but doing it in the right way. So I think what we've seen quite a lot on smart TVs is sort of the attitude of, you know what, if I put 100 recommendations on screen, one of them's going to be right? You'll find something. If you look at all those 100, one of them will be suitable, right? And you might find something. And I think that kind of goes against what we're trying to do to maintain that simplicity. And certainly the feedback that we get from consumers is they just find that overwhelming if they get kind of bombarded with content. And secondly, they just stop using it, to be honest with you. There's nothing that drives people straight into an app front door than an overwhelming UI that's too cluttered. So what we're really focused on is, and you're absolutely right, at the moment is driving recommendations through ML. Yes, we're looking to enhance that with AI as well to make that even more complicated. But I mean, I think today our ideal is that we will have a sort of complicated ML-driven back-end so that we have a super simple front end for the consumer. And if I look at Roku today, I mean, I think, thankfully nobody sees them all, but there's more than 1 million versions of the Roku UI out there today, because we have kind of, and I don't just mean different content recommendations, but different rows that get presented, different orders, and they're all ranked, and it's based on that user and it's their usage, but it's not just them as a user, it's their usage on that device at that time, on that day of the week. So really trying to almost be a little bit psychic around what is that consumer likely to want to consume at that moment in time when they come to that device, and really presenting that rather than a whole sea of options that they have to wade through.
Excellent. And I think,
can I just add something
sure.
on this just briefly, which is, I agree entirely with the discussion and the value to audience, but one of the biggest challenges remains in the industry getting hold of the metadata and getting hold of the right user data to match those two things up. And we need to work much, much more closely as an industry on how we solve that. And then that plays to your advertising piece, which is this plethora of solutions that we've ended up with doesn't work for anybody. It incurs a huge amount of cost for everyone and produces poor outcomes for advertisers on the end. And today, some recommendation systems, to your point, the users just ignore because they don't actually serve their needs. Either the system isn't good enough, or a lot of the time just doesn't have the data that it needs to put the right recommendation in front of you. So making sure we work as an industry to solve for that problem, I think, is really critical in the coming years.
That's a very good point you bring up, because I hear it frequently, and I think, just to take a sidebar, what would you fix first? Is it actually the data sharing, or is it equalizing? Let's say you have a very diverse library, equalizing the content, equalizing the quality and depth of the metadata across the library using tools, for example. So where do you think the biggest problem lies to solve first?
I think both need to be solved, but the accuracy and depth of the data, I think, is probably the first and most critical item, and bringing yourself up to a level. It doesn't have to be all the content. Maybe there's some content that never will quite have it, but especially for the vast bulk of your library, making sure that we build that metadata up. And then we have a way of sharing that where the value is reciprocal. The value coming to the platform, receiving that data means we're sending audiences back, but making sure that we have a communication and an ever-evolving sharing of that data, because solving it once only powers the models and the recommendations of that day. You then have to continually improve that and update that so that you can continue to improve the end experience.
Thanks, Ben. I wanted to move to covering a different topic that is constantly on the mind of the TV industry, and whether we're talking about traditional pay TV operators, free-to-air broadcasters, and especially streaming services, which is churn and retention. And how can smart TV OS providers help, for example, free-to-air broadcasters sustain their reach during the migration of their viewers over to streaming? And how do OS providers help subscription services similarly gain and retain users throughout the process? And Ben, would you like to give your thoughts on this from the Google perspective?
Yeah, sure. So we've discussed many of these things. The recommendations piece is absolutely critical to giving that relevant peek into individual services you might want to take up to start to build that funnel to effectively be a marketing tool for any streaming service, or actually any advertising supported service as well. I think the challenges that each of those face are very, very similar. Ultimately, to make the business model sustainable, you first need to get audiences in, you need to recommend them the right content, you need to get over that first barrier to entry. Even the advertising supported, maybe they don't require a credit card, but they do require you to sign in, to enter all of your information. That's quite a high barrier to entry the first time you do it on a device. So getting users in is really critical from a platform perspective. That's one of the best pieces of value we can provide. And then I started discussing about the sustainability of that user engagement. And I mentioned things like continue watching. Really basic platform features are absolutely critical to creating that habit with audiences coming back to apps repeatedly again and again. And then if you start to look at the monetization of those audiences, how do you say, one of the things we're looking at the moment is how can we help our partners know which audiences might want to take up a subscription, might want to move to an advertising type model? How do we help reduce that churn once a user's subscribed? Are there signals that we can share with our partner? We have integrated billing on Google TV as across all Android devices. Is there part of that flow that we can help inform our partners, actually this user's about to churn, but they might stay for an ad and subscription type model? So leveraging some of the platform data that we have to help our partners manage their business and manage their audience retention in the most dynamic and valuable way is definitely something that we're increasingly investing in.
Thank you, Ben. Sally, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. Look, echo everything Ben said. I mean, it's absolutely critical for those services to essentially make sure that they are in the discovery services that the TVOS provides, and they're in it in a good way. We have the metadata, we have great imagery, we have the right content, we know how to do that matching, as you say. I think that's key. I think one of the other challenges that we're sort of all faced with in the industry is when you talk about content and prominence within sort of a TVOS. I think if you, in my mind, sort of TVs are kind of on the third generation now. We're like the third age of TV UI. So I think originally it was pretty simple back in the days of an EPG. I won't go quite as far back as the TV Guide and the TV Times and things, but if you look at the original EPG, it was simple. Prominence was what channel numbers you had, where the numbers were, where they sat, and then that was how prominence was defined. And all negotiations were baked around that concept. I think the early smart TVs came out, and even kind of where we've been on the journey so far has been very much, it was about where is your app placed? How much of the hero image do I get? That big hero image on the home screen, how much share of that do I get? And maybe even what rows do I get? But that's been the crux of the negotiation. And again, I think that's got us to where we are, and I think that's been okay. But everything we've talked about so far in this session has been about how actually these UIs need to be super personalized, right? And I mentioned before that, there's 10 million versions of the Roku UI. So I think what we now need to work through as well as an industry is how do we come up then with commercial constructs with those content partners and the TVOSs that allow them to, yes, have that prominence, but perhaps in a more flexible way that allows the OS to innovate and to actually better meet the needs of the consumers as well.
I would agree. It's definitely focusing on those outcomes.
Yeah.
What does that partner get out of the other end, rather than just that sort of share of input? It's one of the things when we moved from Android TV to Google TV, we moved to a fully recommended UI and a completely personalized UI, and that was because we knew that sort of standard stacked route with a standard set of partner rows wasn't leading to the engagement that we knew we had to create if it was going to be successful.
Thank you both. I think I want to shift a little bit to talk about a few things that relate to just the business of TV, or the business of smart TVs, as it were. And in your mind, are there areas where there still needs to be closer collaboration or functional facilitation between content owners and the smart TV ecosystem in order to improve overall business outcomes? Sally, what are your thoughts?
I'm trying to think, there's many more beyond what we said. You know, I mean, I think in reality, at a business level, it is all the things we've said. It's about making sure that, you know, we have the content. It's about making sure that we have the, you know, the metadata flowing through. You know, making sure that we have the commercial constructs around things like prominence. I guess what's opening up a little bit as well is understanding kind of the monetization of that content as well, and how that looks. Obviously, that's rapidly evolving as well. So as a TV operating system, you know, what do we offer in terms of, you know, we have a great ad platform that we can leverage, and we can help content partners sort of generate revenue from their apps. We have an integrated billing platform which allows people to sort of, again, you know, add your credit card once and then store it and then subscribe to many apps, and that flexibility. So I think less much on the business side, but I guess as an OS, I think we have all of those tools and capabilities to support those content owners in how they're going to sort of generate revenue from their services.
Excellent. Thank you, Sally. Ben, what are your thoughts on how the content ecosystem and the smart TV OS ecosystem can collaborate better or facilitate better business outcomes?
Yeah, I think there's a large change as we came into the connected TV world, as it were. Each provider was focused on their app, and that's where all the focus had to be. To unlock the value of platforms, it takes a level of investment in each of those platforms. The fact that we heard earlier 18 operating systems running at the moment makes that very difficult for partners. Doing that investment 18 times, I think it's fair to say that 18 number is likely to change in the coming years. But making sure that as a content provider you invest in the best integrations with each platform is how you unlock the best value. It comes to metadata, it comes to making sure you're leveraging all the on-device APIs for Play Next, for billing, for any other integration, is what unlocks the value for that provider. And I think definitely Google, and I believe all the operating systems, we know it only works if this is a successful business for everybody. If there are no content providers, the whole thing falls apart. We need to create environments that all content partners can be successful, and so that's an investment from our side in their businesses, and it needs to be the other way as well to make that interface and user experience as good as it can be.
Thank you, Ben. I do have a question where I think for a lot of us in this room, we've been around long enough to remember when set-top boxes were the dominant piece of hardware in the content consumption equation, and in every household, a source of recurring revenue for service providers. And obviously the world is changing. And so how does smart TV OS providers really help pay TV make that transition and make that service as an app, operator as an app, set-top boxless world happen? I mean, and is there any interest in playing a direct role in helping operators pursue this direct-to-TV model and to shift away from the set-top box? Dirk, what do you think?
Well, I think this depends a bit on from which position you look at this. When I'm looking from like a TV brand, which is the main competitor of the set-top box now in the living room, they may often not have an interest in when you look at the first level. Because Samsung would like to absorb the viewing time away from the pay TV operator. That's a natural competition in the living room. But when I look at the pay TV operator, it's like we had fun in the company. Until 2 years ago, I was always saying, if you get an email from a pay TV operator which starts with an R at the beginning, R RFI, RFQ, or whatever, don't open it because it's guaranteed to waste your time, because they will suck all your knowledge out of you, and then they will finally give the project to Accenture. They make a fancy project, and it gets a super fancy set-top box, which costs $500 a piece, and it's not leading anywhere. And it gets a very proprietary system. Now, I changed completely my mind, because what Comcast did with Sky Glass, they changed the view how they look at it. And suddenly I said, how do I gain back control in the living room? I have to kick out the TV. And the consumer who's buying Sky Glass, they perceive the TV coming in for free, part of the subscription. So that's one strategy, is basically, as a pay TV operator, you make your own TV. Sky Glass is a bit expensive for most of them, but it's a valid strategy, and we get more and more pay TV operator coming to us and say, can you help us? And the help is not anymore, here my request, make a TV as I wanted. They say, what do you think the TV we should make? So we come more and more in packaging a whole TV design within OS to help them to win back control. And the second is, many started with an app. They made an operator app sitting on the landing page somewhere, which is very limited, because you have always the risk that you still dilute traffic to something else. And then there are more advanced pay TV operators. They have an app. On that landing page, you log in, and when you log in your subscription, the whole UI changes to the operator UI. So they play with an app on retail TV, and this is super effective, because if they make a $10 subscription per month, they share 30% with the OS. That's a $36 per year, which is very close to the ARPU Roku makes in the US. So it's even, you think on the first sight, why should an OS allow this or TV brand? Because the monetization share is quite attractive. And the whole thing suddenly happens in the controlled environment of the pay TV operator, but distributed via standard retail TV. And I think we will see much more of these developments in the market, which is win-win for both ends.
Sure. Thank you, Dirk. Ben, I'd love to ask you this question, partially because Google does very well with Android TV operator tier and the set-top box universe. So is there an interest in helping operators transition to a set-top boxless world, or at least putting their proposition forth as a pure app type of model?
Yeah, we've seen the whole range of models. MTM just put a chart up before about exactly what BT were doing in the UK, with a full range of set-top box all the way through to just an app. And increasingly we are seeing that the traditional pay TV operators still value having their set-top box. Android TV operator tier does great in that space, gives a huge amount of flexibility for those providers to build the pay TV service they want without having to actually build the operating system themselves. But we are seeing an expansion of trying different routes, maybe it's just a puck device. So rather than the full set-top box with the huge cost and the tuners and everything else, you just are sending a puck with your app on it, or in some way that UI edited. We're saying that we've got Alenta ship a Google TV device in the Nordics and do exactly that model. And then we are starting to see, Sky have been the big dominant in this space for a long time with their Now service in the UK, Italy, Germany, which is moving to that SVOD model, maybe aligned with them selling you broadband or mobile or anything else, so still that triple quad play that pay TV has always operated in. But actually the offering to the end consumer feels much more SVOD. And I reckon for a good period of time, we're going to see all of those options offered by pay TV platforms as they start to move their audiences in a slow manner over a number of years from one to the other.
And I agree. I think there's going to be a need for a mix of options available as the transition takes place, because for many of them, it's going to be a very intentional and long-term process. Yeah. So at every stage of the way, they need some option, and I think for many of them, they're still very committed, if not through the business, even to a small degree, I would argue ideologically, it's difficult for them to pull away from the set-top box orientation.
And they still have some audiences who love it. Yeah. It may be a declining as a total number, but there's still a very significant audience base who enjoy that experience.
True. I have another question which may be just for Dirk. So as we look at wider licensing of smart TV OSs, and we look at how broader licensing potentially improves the overall consumption experience across a wider range of TV models, especially more affordable and lower priced smart TV models. Can we expect this to expand smart TV viewership, obviously to more households, but across more circumstances and use cases where you might have put that older TV, like the kitchen or that third room or the basement or what have you? Does the wider availability or more choice in smart TV OSs across a broader set of TV set OEM needs start to really expand smart TV viewership in that way?
Well, I think it may expand the viewership across more devices, but I doubt that we have more time to consume more as we consume today. So I think there will be the natural limitation in terms of the hours we spend already. But I agree, it will, and we will move soon in an era where TVs may come out for free. When you just look at what I said before, $200 a unit, when you convert this in 7 years, we saw before 7 years, 30 euros ARPU, that's close to be break even. So I think the moment when either it will drop more the price, the absolute price will drop dramatically, and there will be systems out there where the whole thing is packaged in a bundle and TV comes for free, which naturally will trigger more TV consumption in terms of hardware purchase. And we have already today this consumption. I mean, we don't go from TV to a smaller TV in the kitchen or the bedroom. We go from TV to the iPad, to my desktop, to my mobile phone. And this happens already in my house every day. That people move around and carry along the content on different devices. It would be much easier if it would be just a TV you can speak to when you go to the kitchen and say, please carry on with my Netflix series. So I believe it will add also more viewing time, but the question is if this viewing time gives the same attention as we are used from the main TV, which may be less attractive for advertising.
Excellent. Well, we're almost at time, but I had one last question, which is a bit more topical, and I don't know how each of you feels about it, but I think it's impossible to miss a lot of the M&A behavior that's been going on in the sector today. Not just between content owners, but also we see smart TV platform owners getting into live sports and having BMVPDs and so on. And so I think I think that this is inevitable, especially as we're in an era where the streaming market is looking intensely at efficiency, profitability, financial viability, and I think it's only going to continue. So if we accept that that's going to be a constant of the market, that M&A behavior is going to happen, and you may see more integration, such as we've seen the platform providers getting into content, how does that affect content distribution on the smart TV? What are some of the ways in which either the content owners or the smart TV platform providers stay nimble? And are there threats that this presents? Obviously, are there opportunities that it presents? Like, how do you think about the M&A that's going on?
I mean, this morning we discussed the Visio Walmart. I think it's one of the first. There are not so many retail chains that could have the same impact as Walmart has, but like they're fully French, and there are few in the world that could follow a similar strategy. And I think that the unfortunate thing in this whole market is the underlying market is not growing. The total viewing time is not growing. The total device number is not growing. So it's a highly fragmented market which calls for consolidation. M&A is one of the key levers. Maybe these two should talk later about something.
I think it is up to us, right?
Yeah.
And so we will see this, but you see already that platforms try to acquire content. So there's a vertical integration game, which famously started with Amazon MGM. And Roku did the same with Quibi, acquiring into content, originals. I think this will continue for a while. We would not do it because we want to stay neutral, but it will happen ultimately that the market will consolidate dramatically. So I think, but the biggest consolidation impact I see from exiting because of no viability of the business model. This would be probably causing more change because when you don't happen on the landing page, you don't happen. And 85% of the content providers in connected TVs don't happen on the landing page. We see this from the data, from the use data. So a lot of people will exit when the VC money is gone. And there is the question of viable business model. So that's what we see. So, and I think the M&A to predict will be hard, but I think we will also see OS acquisitions to buy the footprint because it gets more and more difficult to grow without
Right.
acquisition.
Right.
And unfortunately, everyone is on the stock market listed. Fortunately, we are not. So we can be a bit more relaxed on that. But that's what we're going to see.
Good. Thanks for that, Dirk. Well, unfortunately, we're up against time. So let's give a big hand to Sally, Dirk, and Ben. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.